My therapist told me that writing this would help me heal, so I'm putting it into words and posting it on an anonymous site, even though it's been years since it happened. I have no idea if anyone will read this, but then it is written for me and not for a general audience. If you do read this and learn something, it might be worth it. I had an affair. I cheated on my husband 3 times before my lover, and I got careless and got caught. Thank God he didn't catch us. It would destroy him. Well, that would destroy him even more. Either way, it ended up ruining our marriage, but at least he didn't have eye contact. No, we were caught by a colleague, the one who resented our success and without hesitation knocked us off our pedestal. It wasn't like I was waiting for this to happen. My therapist finally made me understand that nothing happens just like that. You make choices every day of your life, and from that moment on, the consequences change your life. She taught me that a person makes a choice, whether he realizes it or not. So I had an affair. I'd like to say I was drunk or drugged, but the first time I drank 3 glasses of wine the entire evening. He was very cute, and we flirted with him lightly for almost a year. It so happened that we were on the same team and often completed projects together. We even joked about being work spouses to our significant other when we were all together and everyone was laughing. My husband grinned. Fine. As my official work husband, I pass on the costs of her shoe fetish to you. His wife got into an argument with us. Yes, and I'm passing on teaching you how to leave the toilet seat down. We look forward to regular progress reports. We all laughed and hugged each other before leaving the party. Hubby told me how much he liked them on the way home and maybe we should invite them into our circle. They had just moved here and were eager to make friends, and we subsequently spent many pleasant evenings with them and our other friends who accepted them unconditionally. I won't bore you with descriptions of appearances, such as how big my breasts were or how well-toned it was. What does it really matter? We were young, fit, fairly attractive, and that was the end of it. And under no circumstances will I talk about sex. My husband was 30 years old. As the oldest of us, the rest were in their late 30s. I had a good job. I got it right out of college and worked my way up. I had several promotions over the years, and the old man, he was 70 years old, who owned the company often told me that I was exactly the kind of daughter he wanted to have. I became a team leader, which required an average of 1 night's rest every 2 months. I didn't like it, but hubby said it was nothing special. I left on Thursday morning, spent the afternoon and the next morning in meetings, and was usually home by 4. When I returned home, we used to make love as if we hadn't seen each other for weeks. But as it became routine, things cooled down. It's not that we were bored with each other. We were young and we enjoyed making love on average 3 to 4 times a week. Sometimes, if we were really busy, it might happen once a week, but whenever we had the opportunity, we would try to catch up. We dated for 8 months and lived together for almost a year before we got married. We were together for 3.5 years as a married couple. The sex came after a pretty intense round of encounters, and we were both on edge. We had dinner together and shared a bottle of wine. Oddly enough, the main topic was about how much we missed our spouses and some future activities we had planned together as couples. A comment was made, which we agreed with, that when we were as stressed out as we are now, sex with our spouses was the stress reliever of choice. I remember how it was said, but I can't remember who said it, me or him. Then everything moved on to light flirting, hints, and minor touches. He joked that as work spouses, we should take advantage of the privilege of our actual spouses. I admit it, he was handsome and always found the right words, which made him invaluable on my team. We finished the wine, but eventually went to our rooms alone. I was thinking about him, lying in bed, touching myself, using him as fantasy food, when there was a knock on my door. I put on my robe, opened the door, and saw him standing with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We didn't even have time to finish the first glass before we attacked each other. Soon we found ourselves on my bed, copulating furiously. Neither of us lasted long, but we lay there, caressing and cuddling, until it was time for the second round. He left me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I collapsed back into bed and slept like the dead. I woke up at 7 feeling like I was suffocating, literally gasping for air. I cheated on my husband. I shoved my vows into a dark corner of my mind and had sex like an animal. I probably took the longest shower of my life, trying to wash away what I had done. He was also depressed. He barely made eye contact with me during our morning round of meetings. We were seriously underperforming that day. We didn't even sit together on the plane home. We danced around each other for 2 weeks before he walked into my office and closed the door. We talked for 45 minutes. He apologized for approaching me, and I apologized for accepting his offer. We agreed that this would be a one-time thing, and we would take this secret with us to the grave. This went on for 6 months. I thought we left the past behind us. I know I felt as depressed as humanly possible for about a month, until hubby directly asked me what was bothering me. Nearly losing consciousness, I came to my senses and told him it was work-related. Technically, it wasn't a lie. But I resolved it, and the problem was a thing of the past. He frowned, and then almost broke my heart. I'm going to call X and tell him to keep an eye on you. After all, if his wife and I could, I would do the same. 6 months later, Christmas arrived, and we were stranded for 2 days in a northern city due to one of the worst snowstorms on record. My husband and I talked a couple times a day, and he told me to let my work husband entertain me. He told me that he and Mrs. X were going to the theater together to see the show I had been looking forward to all year. He could tell I was upset. If it bothers you, we won't go. I'll give her the tickets. Maybe your sister can go. I recovered enough to tell him that everything was fine, but he owed me a big surprise next Christmas. He agreed and said he was already working on it. X and I commiserate, and he complained about how much his wife liked my husband. It's always like this. Look how attentive he is. It must be nice to be treated like a queen. Did I tell you about the dainty necklace he bought her just because he saw it and thought how good it looked on her? I unconsciously stroked the necklace, smiling at the joy it brought me. It was a complete surprise. Not my birthday, not Christmas, simply because a sensual neck like yours deserves it. This will highlight the smoothness and perfection of your skin. It wasn't perfect, and it had minor flaws that irritated me to no end. Then I saw other couples in our group how the women were jealous of me, and the men either admired him or were disgusted because he set the bar so high. Then I just smiled and squeezed his hand a little tighter. We ended up getting drunk and having sex for 2 days. We were still doing this when they called my room to tell us that the airport was now open and we could go home. We showered together, sat on the plane together, and vowed that while we enjoyed it immensely, it would absolutely never happen again. 4 months later, we were caught. I know you want to know about sex. It was sex between 2 young, healthy adults. Yes, it was good. Was it worth the price? No. Without going into detail, I will say that the consequences were enormous. My boss called us both separately. He was almost in tears when he saw me. I can't tell you how disappointed I am in you. You were the best of the best. I've always admired your marriage. I thought it was very similar to mine when my wife and I first started our journey together. Do you still have a husband? I nodded, not bothering to hide my tears. Yes, I was still married even if I hadn't seen my husband for 2 weeks. Fine. He was a wonderful person. I hope deep down he forgives you. I have to protect my business and I can't be so lenient. You still have your job, but your days as a team leader are numbered. You will never travel representing this company or represent it publicly again. You understand? I nodded, glad that I still had a job. However, I knew that my days in his company were numbered. My star will never rise higher than I am now. Somewhere in the future, I'll have to dust off my resume and hope he gives me a reasonable recommendation. Things weren't going so well for X. He left quietly in exchange for a reasonable recommendation. I was sure it was carefully written. Mr. X has excellent communication skills, works well with others. However, I knew that if one of my boss's friends thought about hiring him, a quiet word would get through and the old boys network would start working. I truly believed that if we talked, we would both apologize for ruining each other's lives. However, we didn't do this. Our boss and spouses took care of it. My husband, who I never heard raise his voice, told X in no uncertain terms that when he finally found him, he would wish he had killed him because from then on it would be a miserable, painful life. X believed him and left for parts unknown as soon as his divorce was final. He left behind a devastated wife and 5-year-old son. I think it took her years to come to her senses. 8 years passed before she remarried to an older man who doted on her and her son. He asked his son what kind of car he would like for his 16th birthday and couldn't stand it when the boy told him that what he would value more than a car was the use of his last name. So, with one stroke of the pen, X was erased from his life forever, and his new dad bought him a top-of-the-line sports car despite his mother's objections. X never saw his son again after he left, although his wife tried to find him to remind him that she had divorced him, but their son did not. I found my life suddenly divided into segments. Era, if you like. In my life, there were before the novel and after the novel. I remember how, before the novel, I was full of light and happiness, and after the novel, grayness and despair. Fortunately, after the affair did not come close in time to before the affair. Then it's time to choose a side. Other couples had broken up in our usually tight little circle, and the remaining couples didn't know how to cope. Who do we invite to barbecues, parties out, and sleepovers at home? Gone were the casual advances and innuendos, feared it would bring back terrible memories to those still around. I was kind of glad when we sold the house and moved in different directions. I'm sure other couples breathed a sigh of relief, just not in front of our eyes. The women in the circle sympathized with my plight and offered me support, but at the same time made sure that I did not get close to their husbands. After all, I had already upset one marriage that was happy, and there was no need to tempt fate. Things were even worse for X. The men supported him, making damn sure he never got close to their wives in an intimate setting. There was a lot more support for hubby and Mrs. X. After all, they were offended, right? It wasn't their fault that they ended up in the mess their lives had become. Then I had to move on to the third phase. Tell your parents, friends, and relatives. I disappointed both couples, but they both forgave me, even though my marriage ended. I still send Christmas cards to his parents and gifts on their birthdays. They always sent me cards back, and a few years later, his parents asked me to visit them if I came to town. I never went, but thanked them warmly for their kindness. The first victim in the post-novel era was our personal life. We used to tease, harass, make slow, languid love, or rut like animals, depending on our mood. It took 3 weeks for hubby to come back to us, and another 6 before we attempted any intimacy. It was a complete disaster. We were both afraid. He, that he will be compared to X, and considered insufficient. I, that he will do the wrong thing, and it will bring up terrible memories. As the months went by, things mostly got better. We tried to please each other when I felt like his body was just shutting down. At first I understood everything, but towards the end I began to resent it. Didn't he see how hard I tried? How much did I love him? We went through counseling, and it helped. This helped us realize that everything was over between us. I betrayed his trust, no matter how hard I tried, how hard I worked to heal his heart. The wound was too big. So, after a 1.5 years, we were no more. The divorce was not contentious, just a straight, even split. I didn't even cry when I received the final papers. We saw each other from time to time because our city was not very big. We always said hello to each other and we're politi, but that was about it. I remember how heartbroken I was in the 4th year after the affair when I looked through the window of a cafe in the city center and saw him with a woman. She smiled, sat next to him, giving him the intimate touches that every woman considers destined for her lover. I went home and cried my eyes out one last time. I sent out resumes everywhere and received an offer from a company located 2 states away. This was a major step forward and just what I needed. I said goodbye to the friends I was leaving, kissed my parents, and moved on. Now I have moved into the post-divorce era. I thought about the psychologist I saw for several months after my divorce. She really helped me. Not showing sympathy or blaming, mostly just listening. During our penultimate class, she surprised me by pulling her blousie out from under her skirt and lowering it a little. She had a rather large scar on the side of her thigh. She straightened her clothes and sighed. We were young, about 16 or 17, and my friend asked her older brother to bring us some drinks. It was mostly liquor, so it got us drunk pretty quickly. We went deeper into the forest to stay out of sight and lit a fire when it got dark. Not that big, and one thing led to another, and then risk, so one boy jumped into the fire. Soon we were egging each other on and we were all doing it. I was making my 5th jump when I tripped and landed on my side on the smoldering coals. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks and that scar will never go away. After I graduated, I realized that it was a conscious decision that I made to jump through the fire. The more I did it, the easier it became until I became careless. This scar is my price. The point I'm trying to make here is that you made a conscious decision to have sex with a man outside of marriage, and when nothing happened, when you realized you could get away with it, you did it again and again until you didn't get caught. She paused for a moment before continuing, repeating herself. You did it over and over until you got careless and got caught. Understand? You can't explain it as a momentary situation. Your choice to continue meant that despite jumping over the fire several times and feeling safe, you eventually tripped and fell. The scars you carry are inside and they will never go away, but they will get smaller over time. Next time you have to make a choice, don't forget to scratch your scars. I thought about it a lot over the next week before I realized she was right. I could blame X for this. He showed up at my door, but did not force his way in, and everything that happened as soon as the door closed behind him was a mutual decision. Just like the subsequent times were an easy decision on my part. So here I was, divorced for 4 years now. I heard from relatives that hubby has found someone new. They had been married for a year and had a brand new son. I started dating about 6 months after the divorce, but there was no spark with either of them. I admit that I sometimes took one of them to bed with me just to satisfy my needs. Right after the last one left, I lay in my bed, looking back on my life, and realized that I had to let go of the past if I ever wanted to be happy again. I stopped visiting bars and groups of guys, joined a gym, and began participating in social activities. Once I was fit enough, I entered 5K and 10K races. I never made it into the top 10, but I made a lot of friends. One fellow runner and I got along so well that we trained together. After training, we had coffee, then lunch, then dinner. We dated for 4 months before he let me into his bed. He was so attentive and caring that I cried after the first time. 4 months later, we were doing well, and he was hinting at upgrading when I told him why I was single. I wanted him to see me as I was before and as I am now. I assured him that I had been faithful to him since the first date, that the mistakes I had made in the past were just that. Mistakes. Mistakes I didn't intend to repeat. I didn't know it, but he had been married before and divorced when he caught her having multiple affairs. It was written in stone in his head, once a cheater, always a cheater, and the relationship died. I grieved for a while, but I moved on. The next year I learned that God had indeed forgiven us for our sins. More importantly, I found a man who could forgive me. He was 7 years older, but lean and fit. We met at the race and both crossed the finish line at the same time. I was so happy to finish that I did a little victory dance, lost my balance on the uneven sidewalk, crashed into him, and we both fell. Instead of being upset, he laughed. I landed on top of him, and for a minute we lay nose to nose. I tried to apologize, and he smirked. You know, if you wanted my attention, you could smile, maybe flirt a little. There was a lot of fighting. However, I will forgive you tomorrow night at dinner. I hope you like French cuisine. He handed me a business card from his gym bag. Call me and tell me what time is most convenient for you. It's a bit of a high-end establishment, so wear a nice dress. I was still trying to formulate coherent words when he cupped my face in his hands and kissed my cheek tenderly. Then he disappeared. My running buddies were laughing hysterically. It didn't take long, did it? If I had known that communicating with a man would interest him, I would have given this handsome salesman a beating the first time he appeared. Well done, girl. Did you know that he is the fourth most desirable bachelor in the city? No? Well, good luck. The restaurant lived up to its billing. He was dressed casually but elegantly, in what must have been very expensive clothes, and his tie must have been pure silk. I was wearing my best dress, which I bought at a huge discount because they tore the hem. One of my hobbies was sewing, so I fixed the gap by cutting it out and raising the hem a little more than an inch. I thought it emphasized my legs, and I must have been right, judging by the way my date looked at them. The date went well, as did the subsequent ones, spanning an 8-month period. He was fit, attractive, and I started having lustful thoughts that I hadn't felt in years. It was more than lust. It turned into love. I haven't felt this happy after making love since I was before the divorce. It broke my heart, but I was being truthful. He listened to me, handing me tissues and rubbing my shoulders as I cried. I tried to gauge his expression, and he seemed... I was a little surprised. I understand if you don't want to see me. I won't be afraid to tell you that I have strong feelings for you, and that if you continue dating me, and it goes further, I will sign any document, accept any prenuptial agreement that you propose, if it means being with you. He hugged me tenderly. I know everything about your ex-marriage and affair. Yes, I probed you, invaded your privacy. Understand, I fell in love with you and could not understand why such a beautiful and desirable woman was still not married. So you've made a terrible mistake, but you seem to have accepted the responsibility and the cost that comes with it, and that's very important to me. He stood up, walked into his home office, and returned with a small box and a large envelope. First, he held out the envelope. Read this. If you don't mind, after you're done, open the box. Before asking for a pen, I read the papers in the envelope twice. I signed in all the designated places and returned them to him. I just signed an agreement that said I was on a 20-year probationary period. But if I complied with the requirements, it would be terminated at the end of the term. There was only one clause in the contract, that I will be a faithful and devoted wife. I dropped the box on the coffee table twice before I opened it and cried as I put the ring on my finger. So, I entered my era of supreme happiness. We lived happily ever after. I didn't deserve it, but I've learned to live with it, and over the years I've made damn sure he knows I'll never let him down. I recently returned home for a high school reunion and ended up sitting with my ex and his wife. It was a stretch at first, but 15 years have passed. Eventually, we talked openly. I apologized one last time. He accepted it and told me that he had forgiven me a long time ago because the anger and pain were too much to carry around. I told him it took more than a few years to forgive myself, but I finally got there. We spent the rest of the evening talking and showing pictures of our children. We had 2, both girls, and they had 3 boys. That's the moral of the story. Sometimes good people do stupid things, even if they didn't mean to, even if they weren't caught. It would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There will always be a little voice in the back of their brain that whispers, what if this is the day they find out? I was arrogant because, deep down, I truly believed that if I got caught, hubby would forgive me. You can all see how well it worked. I watch my girls like a hawk, and when they are old enough to understand, I am going to tell them about my past and hope they have the maturity to learn from it and forgive me. I'm also going to tell them the story about the scars. This is it. My therapist was right. I'm glad to get this off my chest. Thank you for listening, and if I have helped you make a decision that would prevent you from creating an event, changing your life, then good. If I hadn't done that, well, that's all on you. If you think about it, think about how well you can tolerate scars. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to